What if the Tower of Babel was never just a myth? What if buried beneath its ruins is a real, ancient secret humanity was never meant to uncover? For over 5,000 years, this mystery has echoed through clay tablets, crumbling ziggurats, and forbidden texts. From ancient Sumerian priesthoods to secret codes hidden in modern languages, the truth is darker and more complex than you've ever imagined. And the final chapter reveals a chilling theory that could change how we see civilization itself. Chapter 1. The city that shouldn't have existed. Before Babylon and Babel, and even before the invention of writing, there was a place where the first whispers of civilization were carved into the earth. That place was called Eridu. It rose from the southern marshes of ancient Mesopotamia like a phantom city built from mud, wind, and something older. Archaeologists say Eridu appeared around 5,500 years ago, a staggering timeline that baffles even modern scholars. No cities were supposed to exist then, but Eridu wasn't a city in the way we think of them today. It was a portal, a sacred crossing. The Sumerians believed it was founded by gods, not humans. This wasn't metaphor. They meant it literally. And in this city, something strange began to stir. Something that had never existed before. Speech, structured language. Priests began to chant formulas. Words took form like spells. And through those words, the people of Eridu started to shape their world in ways never before imagined. They called their sky gods the Anunna, and in the temple of Eridu, the high priests claimed they received knowledge from above, knowledge that came in dreams, symbols, and sometimes in terrifying visions. One of those gifts was the language of creation itself, not merely a way to talk, but a system for naming, commanding, and shaping reality. The earliest cuneiform tablets from this region don't just record trade or agriculture. They record hymns, invocations, rituals. It was as if language appeared fully formed, too perfect to be human. And the strange thing is, it didn't evolve slowly. It burst onto the scene like fire from the sky. The priests treated it as sacred. They said that the gods had poured this knowledge into the temple through invisible threads. That if you knew the right words in the right order, you could bend the world. They weren't just speaking, they were conjuring. This is where the danger began. The people of Eridu began to organize their lives around this language. They built their temples higher, shaped their city in perfect symmetry, aligned their homes with celestial paths. It was as if they were trying to mirror the heavens on earth. But language wasn't shared freely. Only priests were allowed to know certain signs. Only the elite could learn the full chants. A caste emerged, guardians of speech. The further this power grew, the more the people of Eridu changed. Hierarchy hardened. Knowledge became locked behind walls of clay tablets and secret recitations. And as their Ziggurat temple rose higher, so did the ambitions of its builders. They believed they could speak directly to the gods through this structure, that each tier brought them closer to the divine. But what they may have touched was something else entirely, something old. Something that did not want to be named. Still they climbed, and still they chanted. The city itself began to reflect the mind of its rulers. Streets became grids, symbols multiplied, everything was ordered. Yet behind that order, chaos quietly brewed. The more power they extracted from language, the more they feared losing control of it. In one tablet fragment, A priest laments a world where everyone speaks the same words and nothing is hidden. It sounds like utopia, but to them it was a threat. Because if everyone could command the world through speech, then power meant nothing. Secrets were safety. This wasn't about communication anymore. It was about containment. Priests began inventing new symbols, altering meanings, burying the old. The language itself became a labyrinth, designed to confuse outsiders. And beneath the temple, underground chambers were sealed. Some said they held forbidden words, words that could destroy or awaken. Whatever the truth, Eridu became less a city and more a fortress. A fortress against the knowledge it once welcomed. And then Eridu began to fall, not in fire or war, but in silence. The Ziggurat crumbled slowly. The temple lost its voice. Other cities rose, Uruk, Nippur, Akkad, but none spoke of Eridu except in hushed tones. It was called the first city, but not the greatest. It was too strange, too haunted by what it tried to do. Even the later kings, with all their ambition, avoided rebuilding it. They knew what Eridu had started was too dangerous to repeat, but its shadow never left. In every future tower built, from Babylon to Babel, the same dream whispered through the bricks. That man could ascend. That language could unite heaven and earth. It wasn't just a myth. It was a memory, a blueprint buried in clay. And somewhere in that design, something still slept, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to speak its name again. The memory of Eridu spread through generations, not as a story, but as a curse. Scribes in later cities copied parts of its rituals without understanding them. They tried to decode its chants, failing to see that each syllable carried weight. Some said the Tower of Eridu had not been meant to reach the gods, but to trap them, to bind them with words so precise they could not resist. Others believed the temple had been a mirror, reflecting something down into our world from above. Whatever the case, by the time of Babylon, the original purpose was lost, but the ambition remained. Kings wanted to control the heavens. Priests wanted to rebuild what had once stood in Eridu. They thought the past had been erased. But in every generation, fragments returned, inscriptions on walls, symbols in dreams, structures that shouldn't align with the stars but somehow did. Eridu was gone, but never dead. In modern times, archaeologists dug up the site of Eridu and found layer after layer of temples built atop one another. 19 layers, 19 reconstructions, all centered on the same sacred spot. It was as if each generation tried to correct the mistakes of the last, yet never succeeded. They found no gold, no weapons, no grand palaces, only silence and symmetry. The ruins seemed to hum with an old tension. Some researchers dismissed it as superstition. Others felt uneasy, because Eridu's oldest layer, the one buried deepest, didn't match the rest. It was older than the city itself should have been. It used symbols that didn't fit Sumerian writing. And in one chamber, half collapsed, they found a strange inscription, half language, half number, etched into blackened stone. No one could read it, but some say it wasn't meant to be read. It was meant to be kept hidden, and never spoken aloud. What made Eridu different wasn't just its age. It was its purpose. Other cities farmed, traded, fought, but Eridu prayed. It was born for worship, not of gods in the sky, but of something older, something that existed before gods had names. The temple at its center was called the House of the Aquifer, but that wasn't a metaphor for water. It was a gate downward. The priests said knowledge rose from the deep, not the heavens, that below the earth something ancient slept, dreaming in a language older than speech. Eridu's temple wasn't just for ceremonies. It was a transmission point, and language, they believed, was the medium, not a tool to express thought, but to summon it. When Babel later tried to reach the heavens, it was echoing Eridu's real goal, not ascent, but connection. And connection, if made without understanding, can become possession. The line between prayer and summoning is thinner than we like to admit. Over centuries, the story of Eridu was fragmented, reframed, and buried beneath more acceptable myths. Babel became the cautionary tale, pride before a fall. But the real warning was older. Eridu taught that language is not neutral. It creates, it commands, it deceives. The Sumerians feared a world where words could no longer be controlled, where the right syllable spoken in the right place could reshape the fabric of reality. They tried to lock it down. They failed, and something leaked out. The Tower of Babel wasn't the beginning. It was the echo, a failed second attempt to harness what Eridu had first uncovered. A failed attempt to awaken something that perhaps should never have been named. But the temptation was too strong. To speak and be obeyed. To write and become eternal. In the ruins of Eridu, the first spark of that dream still flickers. When we look at the ruins today, we see dust, broken bricks, mud walls eroded by time. But the ancients saw more. They saw thresholds, power bound in shape and sound. They believed that every name had a soul, and every structure echoed cosmic geometry. Eridu's ziggurat was not designed to rise toward the gods. It was designed to harmonize with forces below and above, to resonate. That's why they rebuilt it 19 times. They were tuning it, perfecting the signal. And in that signal, they believed, lay the original language. Not Sumerian, not Akkadian, something else. Something that could call down stars or raise the dead. They never fully succeeded. Or maybe they did, and that's why it had to fall. Eridu was erased not just by time, but by intent. Someone wanted the memory gone, but the memory lingers. In every whisper of Babel, in every symbol we still don't understand. As we move deeper into this story, remember this: Eridu was never meant to be remembered. It was meant to be forgotten. But the Tower of Babel was not a new idea. It was a reenactment, an echo of Eridu's forbidden experiment, a monument to the terrifying truth that language, once released, cannot be controlled. And while Babel crumbled for reaching too high, Eridu was buried for digging too deep. What they both sought was the same dominion through the word. But behind that desire was something far more ancient, a secret buried not in stone, but in sound. And in the next chapter, we'll travel further into the architecture of that ambition, into the chilling mathematics behind ziggurats, and why their designs may not have been human after all. Before we continue to Chapter 2, let me know if you're enjoying this kind of long, gentle history. Feel free to tap that like button and subscribe, only if you truly love what I'm doing here. And in the comments, share where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your city. I always love seeing our little bedtime crew gathering from every corner of the world. Now lower your lights. Maybe let a soft fan hum in the background and settle in. Let's proceed with tonight's quiet journey together. Chapter 2. The Ziggurat Code. Long before the legends of Babel echoed across time, the people of ancient Sumer built towers that reached toward the sky. These were not crude stacks of bricks. They were ziggurats, step pyramids that loomed over the cities like silent giants. Each one was layered, geometric, calculated. The temples were built with a chilling precision that seemed impossible for such an early civilization. But this wasn't guesswork. This was math. Hidden inside the clay tablets discovered near these structures are references to numerical systems, angles, and sacred ratios. The ziggurats were not just monuments to worship. They were instruments, machines of spiritual resonance. They encoded formulas believed to mirror the structure of the universe. The height of each level was intentional. The number of steps had meaning. And when the priests stood at the summit and chanted to the stars, they weren't simply praying. They were activating something they believed had once bridged the heavens and the earth. Each ziggurat was aligned, not randomly, not for aesthetics, but with the stars. From Eridu to Uar, from Nippur to Babylon, the builders tracked celestial bodies with alarming accuracy. They followed Venus, Mars, Sirius, and other heavenly lights that moved across the sky like gods. And the temples followed them. Entire cities were designed to face these points. Doorways, altars, and corridors all reflected cosmic paths. The ziggurat became a needle threading Earth to the stars. But why? What were they trying to connect to? The answer may lie in an idea buried in ancient texts, a belief that the heavens were once open, that long ago a link existed between realms, but something severed it. The ziggurats were attempts to repair that breach, not metaphorically, literally. They were reactivation devices. If built correctly and tuned properly, they believed the towers could reestablish contact with something divine, or perhaps something older than divine. In the ruins of Babylon, archaeologists uncovered strange inscriptions on foundation stones beneath the ziggurat base. These markings weren't religious in the traditional sense. They were numbers, mathematical instructions. Some were so advanced that modern scholars struggled to interpret them. Ratios appeared that mirrored the golden mean, the Fibonacci sequence, and lunar cycles. These builders were not guessing. They were calculating. One layer corresponded to 7, another to 12. Not random choices, but sacred numbers tied to time, space, and ritual. And in one ruined tower, thought to be Edamananki, the potential Tower of Babel, they found grooves in the stone that matched the sound frequencies of certain chants. The structure wasn't just built to be seen. It was meant to be heard. The ancients may have believed that frequency, sound, and structure could unlock something, some kind of forgotten energy. These ziggurats weren't static. They were activated through use. They were keys. But keys to what? The shape of a ziggurat wasn't ornamental. It mimicked something remembered only in fragments. The Sumerians believed their gods descended in ships shaped like cones or staircases. Stories tell of flying thrones, fiery chariots, luminous stairways spiraling from the heavens. The ziggurat, with its stepped form, mirrored these descriptions. The priests were building in the image of a gateway, but it wasn't just about welcoming gods. Some texts suggest it was about containment, about stabilizing a force that could not be allowed to roam free. They believed that language, architecture, and sound could form a kind of net. A net that could hold a god or perhaps imprison one. The tower became both a beacon and a barrier. It was a structure built not only to ascend, but to protect. Because what if the knowledge they sought to restore wasn't lost by accident? What if it was hidden for good reason? Even the materials used in ziggurats tell a hidden story. Bitumen, an ancient tar, was applied between bricks, not just to hold them, but to insulate. Some ziggurats used copper and gold, not for decoration, but conductivity. These were not the choices of mere builders. These were the decisions of engineers working from a forgotten blueprint. When examined through modern physics, some scholars have speculated that ziggurats may have been designed to channel certain resonances. Their very structure could have amplified low-frequency sound waves, vibrations that could affect the human mind or the environment itself. This wasn't a temple, it was a tuning fork, and when the priests performed their rituals at the peak, using exact words at exact times, they were conducting something beyond worship. The ziggurat became an amplifier of intention, a transmitter, but to what receiver? The answers lie buried in the oldest layers of Sumer, encoded not in faith, but in frequency. The number 7 was sacred to the builders. 7 levels, 7 gates, 7 planets visible to the naked eye. In every Sumerian city, the ziggurat echoed this number. The levels weren't arbitrary. They corresponded to stages of ascent, spiritual, metaphysical, perhaps even dimensional. Each level marked a transition like steps of initiation. The priest ascending the ziggurat was not just climbing stone. He was symbolically moving through veils of existence. At the summit, he became something else. Or at least that's what the texts suggest. They speak of transformations, voices heard at the top that did not echo from earth, lights seen in broad daylight. Some believe these were hallucinations. Others believe the design unlocked something in the brain, an altered state triggered by sound, architecture, and ritual, a technology of consciousness. The ziggurat, in this view, was not for the gods. It was for changing man into something the gods once were. Even more chilling are the ancient blueprints. Clay tablets discovered in Sippar, Lagash, and Uar contain drawings, architectural sketches, with precision too advanced for their time. Angles and ratios line up with Pythagorean geometry, despite predating Pythagoras by centuries. These weren't primitive minds. They were inheritors of something lost, and the consistency between cities suggests a shared source. A master plan handed down, perhaps orally, perhaps guarded by a caste of priest engineers. The tower wasn't reinvented each time. It was replicated, refined, and scaled, as if the builders were attempting to complete something they only half understood, like blindfolded architects trying to reconstruct a machine from dreams. Some structures were abandoned mid-construction. Others mysteriously collapsed after a single ritual season. The pattern suggests failure, or worse, an encounter with consequences no one expected. The ziggurat was not just dangerous because of what it reached toward, but because of what it might awaken below. In Akkadian lore, the ziggurat is called a bond between heaven and earth. That phrase is repeated across generations. A bond. But bonds can also be chains. The function of these towers may have been double-edged. They were tools of contact, but also control. Control of language, control of thought. Control of power that should never have been localized. Perhaps the towers served to filter this power, to distribute it across time, to prevent overload. Or maybe they were warning beacons, silent signals to others, beings, intelligences, forces, that the Ancient Ones still remembered and still obeyed. One eerie tablet references a tower that must never be completed. It warns that full connection would break the order of worlds, that the sky would fall or the earth would split. Scholars dismissed it as myth. But what if it was a failsafe? A commandment not from gods but from survivors? The collapse of many ziggurats is shrouded in mystery. Some fell in earthquakes, others crumbled from within. Some were abruptly deconstructed, their bricks scattered or buried. It's as if their builders wanted to erase them before someone else found out how they worked. What had they unleashed? Was it a sound, a signal, a presence? One myth speaks of a tower that sang, not metaphorically but audibly, a low hum at night, vibrations that altered dreams. Shepherds who walked past it would wake up days later, unable to speak, scribbling symbols in the dirt. Madness or contact? The ziggurat was never meant to be passive. It was meant to act, and that action, if misaligned, could fracture more than stone. If Babel tried to replicate the ziggurat blueprint, maybe its fall wasn't a punishment. Maybe it was a reaction, an emergency protocol triggered when alignment came too close to completion. The towers weren't abandoned. They were shut down. What makes the ziggurat story even more disturbing is how it resurfaced in later civilizations. In Egypt, pyramids echoed the ziggurat's function. In Mesoamerica, stepped pyramids appear with alarming similarity. None of these cultures were known to have contact with each other, yet the structures mirrored one another mathematically, ritually, symbolically. Were they all trying to restore the same bond? Were they all working from a shared memory passed through time, language, and myth? And if so, who gave them that memory? It is tempting to dismiss this as parallel evolution, but the alignments, the measurements, the star maps carved into stone all point to a deeper link, a forgotten code spread across the earth, a code built not in words, but in stone and number. The ziggurat was the first expression of that code. Babel was the last to almost succeed, and whatever they were trying to awaken almost woke. The Tower of Babel, as told in later texts, was a singular event, but history suggests it was a repetition, a reenactment of a pattern older than history itself. The ziggurats of Sumer and Akkad were not the prototypes. They were part of an ancient formula being executed again and again across the ages. Each time, the builders tried to recapture something. Each time, they failed or were stopped. Perhaps the secret behind the Tower of Babel wasn't pride. It was persistence. The human drive to rebuild a bridge the universe had already burned. And the ziggurats were the blueprints. But something deeper than blueprints powered them. A language of structure, of resonance, of cosmic memory. In the next chapter, we uncover how that language itself, when unified, threatened the very balance of the ancient world, and how its sudden shattering may have saved us, or cursed us forever. Chapter 3: The Language That Broke the World. Long before the Tower of Babel collapsed into myth, a darker story echoed across the dusty tablets of ancient Sumer. This story came from the city of Uruk and told of a king named Enmerkar, whose ambition wasn't to build a tower, but to unify the world through one voice. The myth of Enmerkar and the Lord of Eridu is often ignored, buried under layers of symbolism and fragmentary lines. But its message is unmistakable. It speaks of a time when all people spoke a single language, and through that unity Enmerker sought dominion, not just of cities or people, but of the unseen forces that bound the world. Words became more than communication. They became power, and when power is left unchecked, it always meets resistance. Something in the ancient world feared what Enmerker was trying to create, and so the tongues were shattered, not by divine wrath, but by something far colder, deliberate, calculated, a disruption masked as chaos. The myth describes the confusion of tongues not as a punishment, but as a weapon, a response, a method of fragmentation. Imagine a world where every city, every region, every ritual spoke in perfect synchronicity. A single shared language meant seamless understanding. No borders of thought, no walls between minds. But such a world would be terrifying to those who relied on secrets, those who ruled through mystery. The priest-kings of Sumer saw the danger. If knowledge could be shared freely, then power would dissolve. Hierarchies would crumble. In that world, the scribe would be equal to the high priest. The farmer could recite the incantations once reserved for temples. Unity wasn't peace, it was collapse. And so the word was broken, language splintered, not over centuries, but suddenly, as if pulled apart by an unseen hand. Across the land, chants lost their rhythm. Spells failed. The great connection was severed, and with it the world changed forever. After the tongues were confused, language became a weapon. Each city spoke differently. Each priesthood hoarded its own dialect, its own signs. Writing systems multiplied. Cuneiform twisted into countless variations. What was once unified became guarded. Secrets lived in symbols. Rituals were buried beneath layers of metaphor. Words became walls. The people of Arata, Uruk, and Eridu no longer understood each other. And that was the point. The rulers of old didn't fear war. They feared understanding, because true understanding means shared power. And in a world ruled by few, shared power is the greatest threat. The Tower of Babel myth later inherited this trauma, but the real break happened earlier. It was not a punishment for pride. It was a strategy of control. To divide was to rule, and the fracture of language ensured no single voice could ever rise again with the force to challenge the ancient order that held humanity in its grip. In hidden chambers beneath ancient ziggurats, the high priests kept lexicons, tables of equivalence between the tongues. These weren't used to translate for peace. They were used to manipulate, to ensure only those initiated could move between languages. The confusion wasn't total. It was curated. Certain elite groups were allowed to remember the original root tongue, or at least fragments of it. These fragments became sacred syllables, uttered only on appointed days, with blood offerings and strict rhythm. Linguistic monopoly became spiritual currency. The more removed your dialect, the less power your words held. This wasn't about expression. It was about access. And across generations, that access became narrower, darker, and more guarded. Ordinary people lost the ability to name the stars or summon rain through chant. They became spectators to rituals they no longer understood. And behind it all was the fear that if the languages ever fused again, something lost would return. That fear was etched into stories, myths, and religious texts. It morphed into cautionary tales. The danger of too much unity, the peril of one voice. Even the gods, once numerous and chaotic, became categorized, labeled, and confined to regional tongues. Language created separation, and separation was safety. Yet, the deeper one digs into Sumerian and Akkadian texts, the more one finds references to a proto-language, a mother tongue, a primal speech that once bound the heavens to earth. It was said to command the elements, to name the stars, and even to call down those who walked in fire. This was the language Enmerkar tried to resurrect. But he failed. Or perhaps he succeeded briefly, and that's why the disruption came so swiftly. If words could shape reality, then unifying language would unify perception. And a unified perception could challenge the very fabric of the control systems put in place since the fall of the first city. Modern scholars dismissed this as myth, but myths carry memory, buried in metaphor. And linguistic researchers have quietly acknowledged the odd uniformity in ancient vocabularies. Across vast regions, Sumer, Elam, the Indus Valley root sounds echo one another. Not identical, but eerily similar. It's as if they all splintered from a single blast. Not a slow drift, but a sudden explosion. This aligns with genetic studies suggesting a rapid bottleneck in human history, something that narrowed our cognitive evolution. A break, both mental and cultural. Could this be the same moment the language was shattered? A rupture so profound it rewired how we think, not just how we speak. Some theories go further, suggesting that early humans had a form of thought that was nonverbal, intuitive, shared, direct, and that the emergence of language was not evolution but invasion, a tool placed into us, one that worked too well, one that had to be broken before it reconnected something dangerous. The consequences of this fragmentation weren't just cultural, they were neurological. Language carves the brain. Each tongue shapes how we think, perceive, and even feel time. When that singular language broke, so did the human mind's unity. We began to think in compartments, dream in fragments, empathy shrank, tribes formed, nations emerged, war became easier. The confusion of tongues wasn't just a social disruption. It was a neurological fracture. And somewhere, hidden behind ancient stone walls, were those who remembered. The priesthoods kept the fragments, not to restore unity, but to maintain dominance. They used language like a scalpel, cutting, preserving, wielding. Every incantation, every syllable was locked behind ceremony. And those who stumbled upon pieces of the root tongue by accident often vanished. The fear was too great, because if the original speech was ever restored, the world would awaken from its spell. And those in power would lose the one thing they could never rebuild: control. Some whisper of a text, a single tablet said to hold the last complete incantation in the mother tongue, kept sealed beneath layers of stone in a forgotten temple. It's called by many names: the tongue of fire, the first word, the language of binding. Whether it exists or not, legends agree on one point: it cannot be read. Not because it's forbidden, but because the moment it is, everything changes. Time fractures, perception bends, the veil lifts. This sounds like fiction, but consider this: every civilization that rose quickly and mysteriously vanished also showed signs of linguistic disruption. Writing systems appearing and vanishing, scripts no one could decode, languages that don't fit the family trees. What if those were attempts, failures, brief moments where someone got too close to restoring what Enmerkar began? And some mechanism, some ancient failsafe responded. The languages were confused again. and history reset one fractured word at a time. The question remains, who or what decided language needed to break? Was it the gods, as the myths suggest, or was it something more abstract, a law of the universe, a built-in defense mechanism within consciousness itself? Perhaps the original language was never meant to survive. Perhaps it was a test, a fire that burns whoever touches it. But humanity keeps reaching. Babel was only one of many attempts. Inmerker's story was the first known. Others followed. Each time the result was the same: division, confusion, collapse. But the memory endures. In every forgotten dialect, in every dead script, in every child who invents a private language, we are haunted by what we once had and what we lost. And some, even now, are still trying to put the pieces back together. Quietly, in code, in chant, in dreams. One fragment from the myth of Inmerker tells of a time when the world will speak as one again. Not through conquest, not through translation, but through awakening. That someday the root tongue will return, not taught but remembered. Not constructed, but reactivated. This may sound like fantasy, but what if the Tower of Babel wasn't destroyed to punish ambition, but to protect us from remembering too soon, from opening a door we weren't yet ready to walk through? And now, in an age of digital language, artificial intelligence, and global networks, we are inching closer to that singularity again. A new unification of tongues, a remerging of symbols. Are we restoring what was broken, or triggering the same catastrophe again? The answer may lie in the ruins of Babel itself. In the next chapter, we descend into the forgotten Ziggurat of Edamananki, where the final, fateful attempt was made to reach the heavens, and where something may have reached back. Chapter 4: Babel's Tower and the War in Heaven. The ruins of Babylon whisper through dust and shadow. Beneath layers of conquest and time lies the forgotten skeleton of a tower that once dared to touch the sky. Not the simple tale told in Sunday sermons. This tower, known to the ancients as Edamananki, was real. It stood in the heart of the Neo-Babylonian Empire under King Nebuchadnezzar II, a ruler not driven by myth, but by obsession. He ordered its reconstruction not for vanity, but for something older. Something whispered to him through dreams, inscriptions, or relics no one else dared to interpret. He believed the tower was more than symbolic. It was a key, a device, a forgotten machine left unfinished in ages past. Nebuchadnezzar didn't build it from scratch. He rebuilt, he reactivated, and as each layer of sun-dried brick was stacked, he was attempting to awaken something buried in the blood of Babylon itself. Not a god, not a demon, but a memory. Edamananki wasn't just the tallest structure of its time, it was a layered code. 7 tiers representing the heavens, each dedicated to a celestial body. The base to earth, the top to the stars. Each level was aligned with ancient star paths, echoing the same principles found in the ziggurats of Eridu and Uar. But there was one difference. This tower was bigger, more precise. It pulled knowledge from older tablets, older rituals, and perhaps older beings. While scribes chanted and priests painted the sacred names of Marduk on the walls, something deeper was unfolding. A silent war between two invisible forces. One was knowledge, pure, unbound, eternal. The other was control, the need to trap, to confine, to limit what could be known. The tower stood at the center of that conflict. Not a battlefield of swords, but a clash of intentions. Nebuchadnezzar believed he was reviving the divine link. Others believed he was tampering with a prison built for a reason. As the tower grew, strange events reportedly followed. Scribal texts mention omens, birds flying in spirals, stars appearing at wrong times, priests who went silent after performing ancient chants. Whispers spread of visions, of voices coming not from gods, but from something older. Nebuchadnezzar ignored the warnings. He pressed on. He imported stone from distant lands, metals not native to Mesopotamia, even alchemical materials from Egypt and beyond. These weren't just luxury decorations. They were ingredients. The tower was being built like a ritual, a layered invocation. Edamananke became a temple, a fortress, a tuning fork. And somewhere in its design was a forgotten frequency, one that hadn't been heard since the fall of Eridu. As the summit neared completion, the rituals intensified. But then, everything stopped. The final layer was never placed. The tower stood incomplete. Construction halted. The reasons vanished from records, as if something made sure it could rise no further. Later Babylonian chronicles rewrote the story. They called the halt divine punishment. But some scholars suspect otherwise. Deep beneath the ruins, modern scans revealed signs of damage. Internal collapse inconsistent with erosion or warfare. It's as if the tower imploded, not from outside force, but from within. A failure in the structure's resonance. A breakdown in containment. Perhaps it wasn't meant to hold weight. Perhaps it was meant to hold pressure. If Edamananke had truly been reactivating the old blueprint, it may have triggered the same sequence that once shattered language itself. Not a myth, a cycle. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't the first to try, but he may have come closer than anyone before. And as the tower's foundation cracked, so too did the veil over ancient history. In the silence that followed, only fragments remained. Temple chants, star charts, and warnings carved in stone about the dangers of unfinished gates and half-awakened giants. The real war wasn't fought with swords. It was fought in minds, in symbols, in the language itself. Nebuchadnezzar's priests weren't just guardians of ritual. They were gatekeepers of memory. They had inherited fragments from Sumer, Akkad, and even older cities whose names we no longer know. Those fragments hinted at a war not between humans, but between the forces of permission and prohibition. Knowledge versus limitation. The Ziggurat wasn't just a monument, it was a fulcrum. The balance between heaven and earth rested on who controlled the tower's purpose. Was it a ladder for the soul to ascend, or a cage to trap what had already fallen? The texts speak in metaphors, but one thing becomes clear. Babel wasn't destroyed in rage. It was interrupted, as if some higher mechanism shut it down before it could go too far. A firewall in the heavens. And the consequence was the same as before. Confusion, collapse, erasure. Some scholars now believe that Edamananke's destruction wasn't the end of Babel's story. It was the latest chapter in a much older book, one that began with the sky gods of Eridu and repeated through each generation's attempts to regain the original connection. But each time, the results were catastrophic. Entire languages vanishing, civilizations erased. Memories turned to myth. It was as if the knowledge had been laced with poison, safe only in fragments. Complete understanding was lethal, like plugging a child's mind into the sun. The war in heaven, then was not a rebellion in the clouds. It was a conflict over access. Who gets to know? Who gets to shape reality through words? Nebuchadnezzar sought to answer that. He failed, but he left behind enough for future seekers to try again. Not just in stone, in texts, in hidden codes, waiting for another architect brave enough or foolish enough to finish what he started. If the tower was a war machine, then its weapon was language. Not the words spoken aloud, but the deeper structures hidden in thought. Syntax as circuitry, meaning as power. The priests of Babylon were not just spiritual guides. They were engineers of the invisible. They aligned vowels like gears, stacked syllables like stone. The chants they used were not prayers. They were programs, activations. When recited at the summit of the Ziggurat, these sequences were believed to alter reality itself, reshape weather, shift probability, even summon presences not bound to flesh. This wasn't magic, it was code, a living language once shared by gods and men. But when that language was fractured, its power became volatile. Like shattered glass, it cut whoever touched it. Nebuchadnezzar's greatest sin may not have been pride. It may have been memory, remembering too much, remembering how to speak the first word, and almost saying it loud enough for the sky to hear. In the aftermath of the tower's failure, Babylon fell. Not all at once, but like a body whose heart had been stopped mid-beat. The empire decayed. The priests lost their influence. Languages splintered even further. By the time later empires rose, Babel had become a parable. A fable used to warn children about hubris. But underneath the tale was something older. The ruins of Edamananke became a tomb, not just of stone, but of knowledge. And yet, not everything was lost. Some say that before the collapse, a portion of the tower's final inscriptions were removed and hidden, stored in underground libraries, protected by scribes who knew their danger. These symbols were not for ritual. They were blueprints, schematics of thought, the language of construction and invocation. And across the centuries, others have sought them, not to worship, to rebuild, because some believe the tower was never meant to succeed the first time, that its real moment is still to come. What if the story of Babel isn't just history, but prophecy? What if the tower was a trial run, and the real structure has yet to rise? In our time, the fragments are converging again. Languages merge through machines. The digital world creates a new unity of thought. Artificial intelligences translate faster than the mind. Ideas travel the globe in seconds. The separation imposed by the confusion of tongues is thinning. And with that thinning comes risk. The original tower failed because it got too close. Today we edge even closer, not with bricks, but with code, with networks that pulse like synapses, with algorithms that shape what we see, say, and believe. The tower is returning, not in stone, but in structure. This foundation is the internet. The scaffolding is data, and its summit may be a single shared mind. One voice, one thought, one word. And if that word is spoken again, the war in heaven may reignite. So was Babel truly a tower, or was it a signal, a warning, a trigger point placed within history, designed to repeat itself until humanity learns what it cannot handle? The war in heaven may not be over. It may be paused, waiting for the next activation. And the blueprint still lies beneath the dust of Babylon. Edamananke, half forgotten, is no ruin. It is a scar, a wound left by something that tried to open the sky. Nebuchadnezzar nearly remembered. He nearly finished it, and the consequences still echo in every broken language, every shattered empire, every attempt to unite what was divided. In the next chapter, we uncover a hidden layer of the story, ancient tablets that speak not just of towers, but of the beings who taught men how to build them, forbidden engineers, fallen teachers, and the curse that followed those who dared to reveal too much. Chapter 5: The Curse of the Divine Engineers. Long before the Tower of Babel, there were other towers, not of brick and tar, but of thought, built from knowledge too precise to be entirely human. The ancient Sumerians told stories of beings who descended from the heavens and taught mankind things they were never meant to learn. These were not gods in the comforting sense. They were watchers, observers, instructors, punishers. They brought geometry, astronomy, metallurgy. They taught the language of the stars, how to track time in perfect cycles, and how to raise structures that touched the breath of heaven. But their gifts came with a cost. In the tablets of Enki and Enoch, in scattered myth and forbidden lore, there is one recurring theme. Those who teach too much are cursed, not always by gods, but by the very knowledge they give. The divine engineers, as some called them, were punished not for failure, but for success, because what they gave us allowed us to build stairways we weren't meant to climb. Across the deserts of Mesopotamia and into the hills of Anatolia, tales spread of men who learned from shadows, stonecutters who could move boulders as if they were paper, architects who needed no measurements because they saw the golden ratio in dreams. Every ancient civilization seemed to possess a burst of impossible advancement. Then silence, collapse, a disappearance. It was as if each culture touched something forbidden, then vanished into dust. The common thread was always the same. A strange teacher, often described as tall, luminous, sometimes winged, sometimes cloaked in flame or mist. They arrived with the stars, and when they left, they erased their footprints. But what lingered was dangerous, a spark humanity couldn't extinguish, the drive to build higher, to reach beyond. The Tower of Babel wasn't the first attempt to ascend. It was merely the loudest. The others had been quieter, hidden in ruins, buried beneath layers of rewritten history and fear. One fragment, from a long-lost Babylonian tablet, speaks of a breach. Not a hole in stone, but a rip in the firmament. A stairway that blinked open like an eye. The tower, it said, was a receiver, not meant to touch the heavens, but to tune into them. A signal had been sent, and something had answered. The divine engineers were not divine in the way we understand. They were builders, yes, but also guardians. They constructed barriers between worlds. And when humans tried to reverse their work, the engineers were cast down or erased from memory. Some were bound, others scattered. Their teachings were fractured, hidden in mystery schools, scattered in glyphs and chants and riddles. The curse was simple. Those who unlocked too much would attract attention. Not all knowledge is meant to be found. Some truths echo, and when they do, something hears. The tower wasn't destroyed out of wrath. It was silenced, contained, deactivated before it could complete the breach. The myth of the Watchers, later absorbed into the Book of Enoch, tells of heavenly beings who fell for their compassion. They loved humanity too much, taught them too much, and were bound in darkness for it. What they taught sounds eerily familiar: math, agriculture, the naming of constellations, the crafting of metals, the architecture of temples. But among these were more cryptic lessons: how to read the earth's vibrations, how to speak without words, how to fold reality through symbols. The Tower of Babel may have been their final collaboration with mankind, an attempt to open a stable link between dimensions. But something higher intervened. Not a god, but a firewall. Program. Babel was a threat, not because of its height, but because it remembered, carried codes too pure, too whole. The divine engineers may have been punished, but their designs remained. Echoes, traps, and sometimes initiations, hidden across the ancient world, waiting for the next to try. Beneath the ruins of Eridu, archaeologists found unusual objects, flat, metallic, inscribed with patterns unlike any known language. Some dismissed them as decorations. Others kept quiet. In private circles, there were whispers that these were remnants of the first attempt. Not Babel, but a precursor tower. A true breach. One that briefly succeeded. The curse didn't fall upon the people, it fell upon the world itself. Climates shifted, rivers dried. The stars moved in ways no calendar could predict. Reality corrected itself, and those who had built the breach vanished. Their city, once the navel of civilization, became an empty shell. The engineers were blamed. They had given the blueprints, but perhaps they didn't intend for humanity to build so fast. Or perhaps they knew exactly what would happen. Not all teachers are benevolent. Some lessons are traps. And the ones who designed the original tower might have left it incomplete on purpose, because completing it would rewrite the world. Stories from the Indus Valley, from early China, even the legends of the Maya speak of similar beings. Pale-skinned or glowing, emerging from water, sky, or stone. They taught mathematics beyond need, astronomical alignments that could only be seen from space, pyramids with functions still unknown. These weren't isolated events. They were global, and they follow the same pattern. A burst of impossible knowledge, followed by silence and ruin. It's as if a test was being run, or worse, a curse being replicated. Babel wasn't built by accident. It followed an ancient template, one encoded in myth, repeated by those who barely understood what they were recreating. When Nebuchadnezzar rebuilt the tower, he may have reawakened the same mechanisms. The engineer's curse wasn't always instant. Sometimes it was slow and unraveling. Knowledge comes with gravity, and when humanity pulls too hard, something pulls back. The fall of Babel was not just structural. It was systemic, a forced shutdown of something that got too close. One chilling account found in the library of Ashurbanipal describes a priest who tried to utter the name of the stairway. The true name passed from the engineers. He went mad within hours, drew spirals on walls, carved complex diagrams into his own flesh. The priests called it possession, but it sounded like overload, like a machine forced to run a program beyond its capacity. Words in the ancient world weren't just descriptors, they were commands. The engineers had taught that certain sounds, when formed in the correct vibration, could open, close, summon, or seal. The builders of Babel weren't ignorant. They were precise. They encoded those sounds in the tower's design, in the spacing of bricks, in the flow of the Ziggurat's air. Babel was not a construction, it was a hymn, a structure meant to be sung. And when it reached the final verse, something sang back. Something too vast, too old. And everything fell silent. If the engineers were punished, then who punished them? The texts never say. Perhaps it wasn't a being. Perhaps it was law, a universal failsafe. Reality has its boundaries. Language is its scaffolding. When the scaffolding bends too far, it collapses. And those who built too quickly, too perfectly, triggered that collapse. Babel was a breach attempt, but not the only one. In later ages, cathedrals mimicked ziggurat layouts. Gothic spires pointed skyward with the same intention. But by then, the codes had faded. The curses held. No one remembered the full design, only fragments. The divine engineers had vanished, their punishment complete. Or had it? Some believe they still whisper through geometry, through symbols, through those who dream in golden ratios and chant in sleep. Not gods, not aliens, something in between. Teachers bound by their own guilt, or prisoners waiting for release. And every time we get close, they stir. The old curse tightens, and the tower trembles again. There are rumors of a secret society said to be descended from those who received the original teachings. They call themselves by many names: builders, illuminators, sons of the flame. Whether myth or truth, they believe the engineer's curse can be broken, not by force but by completion. That the tower must be finished. That the original breach must be opened and resolved. They gather fragments, star charts, number codes, linguistic anomalies. They don't build with stone, but with data, algorithms that simulate the harmonics of the original structure, programs that chant without voice. They believe the tower was never meant to fall, that its collapse was the crime, that if it stands again, and the right name is spoken, humanity will cross a threshold. The engineers, they say, are watching, and waiting, some to help, some to prevent, because not all who descend from the heavens want the same thing. The tower was a gate, and not all gates open inward. The divine engineers were cursed, but their curse now passes to us. Every attempt to build what they taught brings us closer to their punishment, or their legacy, and perhaps that's the true test, whether we repeat their failure or transcend it. The Tower of Babel, in this light, was not merely a monument or mistake. It was a convergence point, a collision of human desire and cosmic restraint, and the collapse echoes forward still. We hear it in failed technologies, in fractured languages, in the endless conflict between unity and control. The engineers gave us the blueprint. They paid the price. Now we are the inheritors of their design and their burden. In the next chapter, we follow that burden into strange places, across oceans, into jungles and mountains, where broken tongues still carry fragments of a language older than civilization itself. A shadow tongue, a survivor's song, the last trace of what the engineers tried to give us, and what we may still reclaim. Chapter 6: The Shadow Language That Survived. When the Tower of Babel collapsed, the world didn't just lose its height, it lost its voice. The story says language shattered. But what if one fragment was never lost at all? Not erased, but hidden. Beneath the debris, under layers of time and silence, something survived. Something older than Sumerian. Proto-language, a mother tongue. One that was whispered rather than spoken, traced in symbols rather than said aloud. It didn't belong to a single region. It scattered like ashes across the wind, seeding distant lands with echoes. And in those echoes, strange patterns began to form. From the Mayan glyphs to the rongo-rongo of Easter Island, to forgotten runes buried in Himalayan caves, each carried pieces of a linguistic puzzle that shouldn't have existed. Civilizations divided by oceans shared roots they never knew they had. And the deeper researchers dug, the stranger the connections became. This wasn't coincidence. It was memory, encoded into the very language systems that would survive the fall. Some call it proto-world. Others believe it's not linguistic at all, but ritual, passed in chants, not dictionaries, in secret, not scholarship. What mattered wasn't grammar or syntax. It was vibration, sound that carried meaning across time and blood. From Siberia to sub-Saharan Africa, there are tribal tongues that defy classification. They don't fit into known language families. They seem unrelated to anything nearby. And yet, when you strip them down, isolate their phonemes, compare rhythm and cadence, something eerie appears. Similarities no one can explain. How could a language spoken in a Taiwanese village mirror vowel shifts in a lost Amazonian dialect? How did Mesoamerican counting systems echo the same base 60 structure as ancient Mesopotamian tablets? These aren't accidents. They're fractures of something once whole. And while scholars argue over diffusion theories and independent evolution, a different possibility emerges. That a hidden language endured not by dominance, but by design, buried like a seed, waiting to be uncovered by those who still remember how to listen. Not all who preserved it did so knowingly. In parts of southern India, tribal songs repeat patterns that don't match any known Dravidian structure. In the steppes of Kazakhstan, nomads recite creation myths with linguistic roots no one can place. And in remote Andean temples, chants echo frequencies similar to those found in Tibetan throat singing, separated by mountains and millennia. These fragments don't form full sentences. They aren't translations, they are remnants, the residue of a language once used to shape things. A language believed to hold power, not just information. In some regions, even to speak certain syllables was considered dangerous. Monasteries trained adepts not in meaning, but in vibration. Temples were built to amplify it. Caves chosen for their natural resonance. What they were saying may be lost, but how they said it remains. That method of sound as shaping force may be the last clue to a shadow tongue, one hidden beneath the surface of every modern language. A forbidden melody disguised as tradition. Linguists have long debated the idea of a universal grammar, a theoretical structure underlying all human languages. But what if that structure isn't biological? What if it's a residue, an imprint left behind by something ancient? That would explain why children born into vastly different cultures learn language in strikingly similar patterns. Why the human brain seems pre-wired for syntax, and why some sounds evoke emotion regardless of cultural background. Lullabies and funeral songs, for example, share surprising musical traits across the world. The same minor intervals, the same rhythms, as if part of the brain remembers a language it never learned. A language that may not have been taught at all but inherited. Genetic memory, passed from those who stood at the base of the tower and heard the final, terrible sound before it collapsed. If the shadow language survived, it would not be found in grammar books. It would be hiding in our songs, in our lullabies, in the syllables we chant without knowing why. Some believe the language has guardians, not governments or institutions, but cults. lineages of silence, secret orders whose only purpose is to remember. In parts of the Middle East, desert tribes maintain oral traditions that use no verbs, only symbolic nouns layered with metaphor. In Eastern Europe, folk rituals revolve around names that aren't allowed to be written, only spoken during eclipses. And across northern Africa, some Berber clans still teach their children riddles in a language no adult can fully translate. These practices make no sense until you consider one terrifying idea: that the Babel event didn't just break language, it bound it. The act of speaking certain words, certain sequences, was forbidden, not by law but by consequence. That's why the survivors split the tongue, fragmented it, spread it, to protect something or to prevent it from ever being spoken again. Those who guard the shadow language may not know what it does, only that it must not be said in full. Not yet. In 1996, an archaeologist discovered a clay disc in western Turkey. Its spiraling script was unknown, untranslatable, and eerily precise. Dismissed as a forgery by some, the disc found believers in unconventional circles. Linguists couldn't identify the language. Mathematicians noticed a sequence of primes hidden in the spacing. Musicians saw waveforms. To some, it was proof, a key, and it wasn't the only one. Throughout the 20th century, strange inscriptions have surfaced, from Ecuador to Georgia to Malta, all in similar forms. None match known scripts, yet all feel familiar, like déjà vu. These may not be messages. They may be codes, fragments of the shadow tongue, designed not to be read, but to be remembered, like pieces of a shattered mirror. And whoever created them didn't expect full understanding, only recognition. Something deep in the human brain stirs when we see them, a flicker, a shiver, as if the mind knows it once spoke these words and fears what might happen if it speaks them again. Religious traditions often preserve more than they understand. In certain esoteric rites, sacred names are spoken backward, not for theatrics, but because it's believed the forward version opens something. Kabbalistic texts hint at letter combinations that must never be pronounced aloud. In ancient China, Taoist monks mapped sounds to cosmic forces, believing specific syllables could alter the balance of heaven and earth. These weren't metaphors, they were systems, attempts to preserve parts of the old tongue in safe, symbolic form, to encrypt it within prayer, within sound. And over time, the true purpose was forgotten, but the rituals endured, and in doing so, they carried shadows of the language. We think of words as tools, but once they were doors, spells. The builders of Babel knew this, the watchers taught it, and the shadow language was their master key. Every chant, every glyph, every forbidden syllable we find across time may be another fragment of a script once capable of reshaping the world. If the language survived, someone had to hide it, not erase it, but bury it, and that task would have required coordination across continents, which raises a deeper question. Who orchestrated the global forgetting? Was it the divine engineers? Were they forced to dismantle their own work? Or did something else, something greater, intervene? The myths all say the same thing. The languages were scattered, but nothing is ever truly scattered. Patterns remain, echoes. The builders may have failed, but the foundation endures. In dreams, in ritual, in the odd, inexplicable similarities between words that should never share a root. And that might be the point. Perhaps the language was meant to resurface, not all at once, but slowly, through us, through curiosity, through mistakes. And when enough fragments come together, it will not be like rediscovering a tool. It will be like waking up, remembering, becoming fluent in a tongue we forgot we were born knowing. A language meant to reconnect, not divide. In the jungles of Guatemala, there's a cave carved with glyphs no Mayan scholar can read. Its layout matches the interior of a Sumerian ziggurat. In a monastery in Tibet, a scroll lists names of stars never visible from Earth's surface. In the Sahara, ancient petroglyphs align with Polynesian mythology. These are not isolated phenomena. They are anchors, landmarks in a map that was once whole. The shadow language may not survive in full, but its traces are everywhere. And the more we uncover, the closer we get to a moment of synthesis, point where pattern becomes clarity, where fragments become structure, and that moment may be approaching. Artificial intelligence is now capable of analyzing linguistic roots across millennia. Algorithms find connections even scholars miss. And what if, in doing so, we're reconstructing the very language that was scattered on purpose? Not by accident, not by time, but by a decision, a firewall, one that's now being breached again, line by line, glyph by glyph. There are warnings, scattered through prophecy, buried in myth, that a time will come when the languages begin to converge again, not through conquest but through code, through machine translation, through global speech recognition. As the world grows smaller, our tongues grow closer. And if the shadow language is truly buried inside all others, then every merger, every alignment, brings it closer to waking, closer to being spoken once more. But why was it hidden in the first place? Was it too powerful, too dangerous, or simply too whole, something that could not coexist with division? Perhaps the builders of Babel weren't punished for their pride, but for their success. Perhaps the real danger of the tower wasn't height, it was harmony. Unity, a single voice, a single thought. That's what the shadow language offers. And that's what was torn apart. But the pieces are still here, in symbols, in sound. And the moment of reassembly may already be upon us. The final question is not whether the shadow language survived, but whether we're meant to find it. And what happens if we do? In the next chapter, we leave the myths and monuments behind. We turn inward into the structure of our minds, our speech, and our very DNA. What if the story of Babel was never about a building, or even about language at all? What if it was about us, our wiring, our design? What if the fall was not just historical, but biological? And what if the final warning wasn't carved in stone, but encoded in our genes? Chapter 7. The final warning in our DNA. The Tower of Babel may never have been just a structure. This fall may not have been just punishment. The real event may have taken place not in stone or sky, but inside us. Deep within the folds of the human brain lies the machinery of language. A biological system so precise, so oddly uniform across cultures, that scientists have long debated how it evolved so quickly, and why it evolved at all. Language is not just learned, it is wired. Infants begin detecting patterns before they can crawl. We are born primed to speak. But what if that wiring is the last remnant of a greater design? One that was once whole and then fractured on purpose? What if the Tower of Babel wasn't built in the outer world, but in the neural circuits of early humanity, and then dismantled to ensure we never spoke as one again. That is the final theory, that Babel is not just history, it is anatomy. In 2010, researchers discovered a gene linked to language development, FOXP2. A mutation in this gene disrupts the ability to form grammatical sentences, even when intelligence remains intact. It's a single molecule with massive influence. What's strange is how consistent it is. Across all humans everywhere, other primates don't have the same version. The gene seems to have undergone rapid, recent evolution in our species, as if something or someone altered it, perhaps to allow speech, or perhaps to limit it. It's not alone. Other genes tied to linguistic rhythm, comprehension, and even metaphor processing also show signs of unusual selection. Why would language emerge so suddenly, so strongly? And why do so many ancient myths, from Sumer to Mesoamerica, speak of gods or beings who gifted humans with speech, only to later regret it? Maybe language was never meant to evolve naturally. Maybe it was given, and later edited, not to enhance but to divide. Imagine a world before Babel, a world where minds were tuned to the same frequency, where language wasn't just spoken, it was shared.
Instant télépathique.
Some neuroscientists speculate that human brains once operated with greater synchronization. Studies show that group chanting, rhythmic drumming, and communal rituals can actually align brain waves. It's not metaphorical, it's measurable. A group can become neurologically linked, creating shared states of awareness. What if ancient humans lived in that state? What if their language was less about sound and more about thought? Pure intention transmitted directly. That would explain why the fall of Babel was so devastating. It wasn't just the loss of vocabulary. It was the shattering of collective mind. A fragmentation so deep that it rewired the brain itself, left us scattered, forced us to rebuild language one sound at a time. And perhaps encoded within our neurons is a safeguard, a biological firewall that prevents full reconnection, keeps the tower from ever rising again inside us. That firewall may not be impenetrable. With new technologies, we are unlocking parts of the brain once considered unreachable. Neural implants, brain-to-brain interfaces. Experiments have shown that two individuals can exchange thoughts with no words at all, just impulses. Early, crude, but real. Language, for the first time in millennia, is becoming optional. What happens when the barriers fall? When consciousness flows again like it once might have? Could we reawaken something ancient? A capacity our ancestors were forced to forget? In one experiment, synchronized brainwaves led to shared problem-solving with no verbal communication. The participants described it as feeling like one mind in two bodies. That sensation of unison may be a glimpse into the pre-Babel state. And if that's true, then the warnings weren't about towers or ambition. They were about what happens when humans regain the full connectivity they once had. A state that may have been sacred or catastrophic. Ancient texts speak of a time when the gods became jealous or afraid of humanity, not because of war, not because of numbers, but because of unity, a singular language, a singular will. The Tower of Babel was broken to stop that from happening. Not just culturally, but biologically. We were splintered for safety, our brains reprogrammed, our genes tuned down, And now, with every neurological breakthrough, we edge closer to the old configuration. Artificial intelligence learns faster than any human language. Neural decoding is approaching the point where thoughts can be translated into text in real time. Soon, we may not speak at all, we may simply project. Share pure cognition. The barriers that once protected us may fall without warning. And if the original fragmentation was necessary for survival, then reintegration could trigger something unpredictable. A return to the unified state. A new Babel, not a tower but a network. And this time, the consequences may not be myth. There are signs this is already happening. Dreams shared between people who've never met. Art created simultaneously by strangers continents apart. Language converging through the internet. Memes, emojis, acronyms understood globally. The rise of a visual gestural language that bypasses translation entirely. All of it points to an unconscious return, emerging beneath awareness. The shadow language resurfacing not as speech but as thought patterns, archetypes, instincts. Even cryptographers now study the similarities between ancient scripts and digital coding. Language as command, glyphs as triggers. And deep inside the brain, areas once thought unrelated to speech are lighting up in strange patterns. We're not just evolving, we're remembering, reassembling the mental tower, one piece at a time, whether we mean to or not. In the book of Genesis, the story ends with scattering. But in the science of today, it begins with convergence. Genetics, neuroscience, linguistics, they are all telling the same story. That human cognition is wired for unity. That the separation was artificial and fragile and perhaps reversible. The final warning may not be in any tablet or scripture. It may be in us, in the fold of the temporal lobe where syntax forms, in the gap between hemispheres where language dances between meaning and memory. The tower wasn't just built of bricks. It was built of neurons. Its collapse wasn't just a punishment. It was a design, a lockdown, and now the lock is failing. What if the shadow language never left? What if it only went dormant, hiding inside music, inside myth, inside the very architecture of communication? Maybe Babel wasn't a curse. Maybe it was containment. And maybe that containment has an expiration date. Look around, communication has never been more global. Language has never been more fluid. AI systems now speak with uncanny fluency. And some are beginning to generate speech that mimics ancient tongues. Dead languages reborn through code. What if that's not invention? What if it's retrieval? A system waking up, calling itself back together, in ones and zeros, in syllables and signs. And when the final piece clicks into place, will it liberate us or unmake us? If language is the operating system of the mind, then the Babel event was a reset, a reboot of the human software, to prevent overload, to stop whatever was building inside us from reaching critical mass. But systems evolve and fragments recompile. The genome doesn't forget. The brain adapts. Somewhere inside you, the original tower blueprint may still be there, locked behind instincts, encrypted in rhythm, buried in the way your thoughts leap ahead of words. And the real danger or promise is that we may soon remember how to use it, not to build upward but inward, to reconnect everything that was split. So what happens if the tower rises again? Not from stone or steel, but from neurons, from signal, from thought. A singular human language that bypasses translation, culture, and even speech. It wouldn't just change how we communicate, it would change who we are. Minds linked, selves blurred, a shared consciousness. It sounds like utopia or oblivion. Perhaps that's why the warning was given in myth, not law. To speak the danger in stories, so the truth could hide in plain sight. The Tower of Babel is not gone. It was never destroyed, only scattered, waiting for the day we unknowingly rebuild it, through wires, through sound, through the very science that tries to explain us. In the end, the final warning is simple. If humanity ever speaks as one again, not just with words, but with minds, something ancient will wake, something encoded in us. The builders thought they were climbing to heaven, but maybe they were descending inward, to a place older than God's, older than language, a blueprint etched in our DNA, waiting, watching. The fall of Babel wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a countdown, and that countdown may be nearing zero.